the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Put together like a jigsaw puzzle. You know, you're sitting there sorting the edge pieces.
Oh, the worst part.
Right, exactly. You're looking at the picture on the box, just trying to make sense of the scattered cardboard on the table. But right over your shoulder, there's this really charismatic friend standing there, leaning in, insisting that the manufacturer intentionally hid the most important pieces.
Right, like a massive cover-up.
Yeah, exactly. They're telling you that the missing pieces aren't just, lost under the couch. They were withheld on purpose to keep you from seeing the real picture. And suddenly, you aren't just solving a puzzle anymore, are you? You're uncovering a conspiracy.
It completely changes your relationship to the missing information. Like, you stop looking for a fit and you start looking for a villain.
Exactly. And today, we're looking at the hidden machinery behind that exact feeling. We've got a fascinating book on the table right now. It's by Samuel Carter, called From Victim to Accuser. Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk, and the Politics of Suspicion.
Such a good read.
It really is. And we're going to figure out how making you suspicious became this highly profitable billion-dollar business model.
Yeah, Carter calls it the unanswered question industry, which is just a perfect phrase.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to decode how legitimate skepticism, which is healthy, is transformed into this serialized daily production of suspicion. And we're looking at two central case studies from the book for this.
Right. Media personality Candace Owens and the tragic aftermath of political figure Charlie Kirk's death.
Right. But right out of the gate, I want to make something incredibly clear to you, the listener. This deep dive is absolutely not about taking political sides.
No.
Whether you lean left, right, center, whatever. Our goal here is to impartially report on Carter's investigative analysis of media mechanics. We're just looking at the invisible engine of modern political media. We are not endorsing the viewpoints or the political factions involved.
Yeah, and to understand how this engine actually runs, Carter argues we really have to look at how the fuel is manufactured in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how suspicion becomes a weapon in adulthood, we first have to understand how vulnerability creates, a desperate need for armor in youth.
Right. We have to go back to Stamford, Connecticut, which is long before Candace Owens was a national political firebrand.
Yeah, this origin story is just crucial for everything that follows. Carter details a deeply traumatic experience she had as a high school senior in Stamford. She became the target of vicious, racist voicemail death threats.
And we really need to be clear about the scale here, because this wasn't just casual high school cruelty in the hallway.
No, it was serious enough to result in her absence from school.
Yeah.
I mean, it sparked massive public turmoil in town, it led to serious legal action, and eventually ended with a substantial financial settlement with the school district.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that Carter spends a lot of time on this because he makes a really vital psychological distinction. The difference between embarrassment and public humiliation.
Oh, that part was so interesting.
Yeah, because embarrassment is just the feeling of looking foolish. You trip in the cafeteria, people laugh, you turn red, but it fades.
We've all been there.
Exactly. But humiliation is entirely different. It is the experience of being stripped of your dignity in full view of others. And crucially, it leaves the victim completely unable to control how their own story will be remembered or, used by strangers.
Right. It's like being forced onto a stage without a script.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
When you learned at a really young age that strangers will just rewrite your trauma to fit their agendas, you develop this intense, almost survival level need to become the one holding the pen.
Absolutely. Carter points out that this teaches a young person a very dark, permanent lesson, which is that visibility is inherently dangerous. Your pain will not remain your own. It just becomes public property.
And there's this bitter irony of how the legal settlement in Stamford actually compounded that feeling. Because you would think a settlement would provide closure.
Right.
Or restore a sense of justice.
You'd hope so. But instead, the introduction of money shifted the entire public debate.
Right.
The town and the local media went from having empathy for a young victim to asking these highly cynical questions about opportunism.
So the very thing that was supposed to make it right just gave strangers another reason to attack her motives.
Precisely. Carter connects some really dark dots here. He notes that trauma doesn't just neatly end when the local news cycle moves on. It fundamentally alters the architecture of trust in a person's mind.
Well, he leaves a scar.
Yeah, a deep one. This early, intense exposure to institutional slowness, like the school failing to protect her quickly, the agonizing legal process combined with the completely fickle nature of public sympathy, it created what Carter calls an adversarial intimacy with the crowd.
Adversarial intimacy.
Yeah, it lays the concrete foundation for a worldview where official narratives are just assumed to be incomplete, self-protective, or just outright manipulative.
I mean, I can see how that trauma builds her armor, but there's a big leap between protecting yourself and, going on the offensive on national television.
Oh, for sure.
How does she make that jump from a vulnerable anti-bullying symbol in high school to this really aggressive, populist, right-wing firebrand who seemingly trusts no one?
Well, she builds a media persona based on projecting the exact opposite of that early vulnerability. She projects absolute, unyielding force. She becomes someone who fundamentally refuses to be handled or pigeonholed by anyone, not the media, not politicians, not even her own allies.
Interesting.
And this is where Carter introduces a brilliant concept, the performance of certainty.
Okay, the performance of certainty. Explain how that actually works in practice.
It's the ability to deliver conclusions with such immense moral force and volume that the audience actually mistakes the emotion of conviction for tangible proof.
Right.
Like the host sounds so incredibly sure of themselves that the listener unconsciously thinks, well, they wouldn't be this outraged unless they had all the facts.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I'm struggling with this a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Because isn't confidence just the baseline for good broadcasting? I mean, people tune in because they want strong voices and clear opinions. Why is this specific brand of certainty so dangerous? To me, it just sounds like a magician who acts so incredibly confident on stage that you completely forget to look at their hands.
The magician analogy is spot on, and confidence is absolutely fine in broadcasting, of course. But Carter explains that in the specific media structure, certainty is being used as a delivery system for inference.
Okay, break that down.
Think about how a traditional investigation works. It's messy, right? You have scattered evidence, dead ends, conflicting witness statements, and a long, boring wait before you reach a clean conclusion. Carter calls this the messy middle.
And nobody wants to watch a television show about waiting for a forensic accounting report.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
what the host does with the performance of certainty is they basically skip the boring, messy part of a real investigation. They don't weigh the evidence for you. They just hand you the smoking gun. And it's a massive psychological relief for the audience because you don't have to sit there feeling confused or, sitting in the fog of ambiguity.
Right.
But the danger is how this certainty treats anyone who disagrees. Alternative explanations aren't just debated, they are treated with absolute dripping contempt.
Oh, I see. So if you believe the official story, you're framed as a naive dupe. You're just a sheep.
Right. The host frames themselves as the only person brave enough to see the hidden truth. So as a listener, you aren't being invited into an investigation where facts are slowly weighed.
You are being invited into a revelation.
Yes, you're being offered a moral identity. By agreeing with the host, you become one of the brave few who sees through the lies of the establishment.
Wow. And Carter shows us exactly what happens when a public figure wielding this intense theatrical certainty collides with a real-world tragedy where the facts are genuinely missing.
Yeah, this is where it gets heavy.
The book shifts its focus to the sudden death of political figure Charlie Kirk and the immediate, chaotic aftermath of that event. This creates what Carter calls the information vacuum.
And if there is one thing modern audiences absolutely abhor, it is an information vacuum. I mean, we've been trained by digital media, by our phones, by social media feeds, to expect instant, on-demand answers to everything.
Constantly.
Yeah. So when a high-profile tragedy occurs and there is silence from official institutions, which, by the way, is completely normal when detectives are trying to gather actual facts.
Right. Investigations take time.
Exactly. But we don't experience that silence as a necessary delay.
We experience it as evidence of a cover-up.
Exactly. The lack of information becomes the information.
Because nature abhors a vacuum, so people rush in to fill it. And think about how terrifying that is for you or anyone listening. You lose someone you love, your entire world shatters into a million pieces, and suddenly you are thrust into this vacuum while millions of people watch.
Yep.
This is exactly what happened to Charlie Kirk's widow, Erika Kirk. Carter details how she became an immediate target of rampant, vicious suspicion. The internet basically confused her physical proximity to the tragedy with guilt.
Yeah, Carter calls this specific phenomenon the politics of projection. When a political movement is deeply connected to a public figure who dies suddenly, the movement often has a profound psychological inability to accept a random, senseless tragedy.
Because a random death is terrifying.
It really is. It means the world is completely chaotic and out of our control.
Right. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone for no reason at all.
Exactly. But a betrayal, a plot, an assassination, that means the world has a structure. It might be an evil structure, but at least there are rules and there are bad guys you can fight.
Wow.
So the movement projects betrayal onto the inner circle, in this case, the widow, because a dark plot is narratively much more comforting and satisfying than random, meaningless chaos.
Which means the widow's grief is completely weaponized against her. I mean, the mechanics of this are just brutal. Carter shows how if she misses a public appearance because she's grieving, it's labeled a clue.
Yep.
If she forces a smile for the cameras to hold herself together, she's called cold and calculating. If she releases a carefully worded statement through a lawyer, the internet says it was scripted by hidden handlers.
It's a no-win situation.
Completely.
Right.
Her irregular, messy, entirely human grief is scrutinized by millions of people acting as amateur detectives.
And this raises an important question about the moral boundaries of a political movement. Carter points out that these movements often loudly champion traditional values like family, loyalty, and honor.
Right.
But under the intense pressure of an information vacuum, they abandon those exact values. They strip a grieving widow of her humanity. She ceases to be a human being who just lost her husband and is transformed into a narrative object.
Just a prop.
Yeah, a prop in a conspiracy theory simply because the crowd demands a villain to make sense of their own fear.
It is incredibly chilling. But it forces us to bridge the gap between this one individual tragedy and the massive digital machinery that makes this kind of behavior happen over and over again. You know, you might be wondering, why doesn't anyone hit the brakes?
Right.
Why don't the media platforms step in and say, hey, let's wait for the police report before we accuse a grieving family member of murder? Carter's answer is incredibly blunt because it pays too well. He calls it the suspicion economy.
The suspicion economy is the financial engine behind all of this. It is built on digital algorithms that mathematically reward emotional activation. If you look at the dashboard of any major social media platform, fear, anger, and moral superiority are the emotions that keep you clicking, sharing, and watching.
Right. That's what drives engagement.
Exactly. And here's the truly perverse incentive. A solved mystery is terrible for business.
Because if the mystery is solved, the audience goes home.
Right. What keeps the audience hooked and the ad revenue flowing is serialized suspicion. The goal is to turn an unresolved tragedy into a never-ending daily series of updates, new theories, and hidden clues.
It's like a TV show.
Exactly. Actual closure kills the engagement. The host's job is to keep you perpetually on the edge of a massive revelation that never quite arrives.
And Carter uses another huge controversy to show how this constant need for engagement creates a pattern of escalation. He brings up the defamation case involving French President Emmanuel Macron.
Oh, yeah, this is a crazy one.
It really is. And for listeners who might not remember the details of this, it's a perfect example of how bizarre this gets. Instead of just debating Macron's actual political policies, parts of the internet and certain media figures started pushing this completely unfounded, highly elaborate rumor that Macron's wife, Brigitte, was actually born a man.
Right.
It sounds absurd, but it gained massive traction.
It gained traction because, in the suspicion economy, audacity slowly replaces accuracy. Carter uses the Macron case to show how a host is incentivized to push boundaries. You throw out a slightly provocative theory, and your analytics dashboard lights up.
You get the clicks.
The algorithm rewards you with 1 million views. So the next day, you push a little further, and the audience cheers even louder. You push further still into outright absurdity, and they love it.
Which leads to this terrifying concept Carter calls audience capture.
Yes, audience capture is arguably the most important concept in the book. We usually operate under the assumption that the media host is the one leading the audience, right? The host sets the agenda and the followers listen.
That's how it used to be.
But Carter argues that the dynamic has flipped entirely. The audience actually trains the host. It's like Pavlovian conditioning. The audience rewards the host for transgression, defiance, and extreme claims with likes, shares, and money.
So if the host suddenly tries to act responsibly...
Oh, they get destroyed by their own fans. Oh, yeah. If a host looks at a situation and says, you know what, we don't have the facts yet, let's show some restraint, the audience instantly punishes them. They label the host a coward, a sellout, or claim they've been compromised by the establishment.
Wow.
The host becomes entirely trapped by the monster they help feed. They have to keep escalating just to keep their job.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? When you are scrolling on your phone late at night and you feel that dopamine rush of finding out a so-called hidden truth about a tragic event, you have to stop and ask yourself a really uncomfortable question.
Yeah, you really do.
Am I actually consuming news, or am I buying a ticket to a theatrical production? Am I watching an investigative journalist, or am I watching a host who is just playing the character I want them to play because my clicks are paying their salary?
Carter puts it perfectly. He says, we are witnessing a fundamental shift from journalism, which is the practice of disciplining uncertainty with actual evidence, to theater, which is the practice of staging uncertainty purely for dramatic tension.
It's turning the news into professional wrestling.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Carter argues we are seeing the birth of a new moral hierarchy in media.
A new moral hierarchy.
Yeah. Think about the old hierarchy. Traditional journalistic virtues like restraint, precision, proportionality, waiting for comment, those were highly respected.
Right.
In this new moral hierarchy, those exact virtues are mocked as establishment weakness. Caution is seen as a lack of courage.
Interesting.
Instead, the ultimate bravery is defined simply by your willingness to accuse, to break taboos, and to offend the powerful completely, regardless of whether the actual evidence supports your accusation.
But as we look at the wreckage caused by this theatrical suspicion, I mean, we're talking about the real-world harassment of a widow, the distortion of truth, the complete erosion of public trust we have to confront the ultimate moral question Carter poses. How do we hold these media figures accountable for the damage they do? And what does this mean for the future of the political movements that embrace them? Carter makes a really profound point here when looking back at Candace Owens. He writes, trauma is not a hall pass.
It is a critical distinction. Carter writes that while Owens's early trauma in Stamford completely explains her worldview, like it explains why she distrusts institutions, why she demands absolute narrative control, why she wears that aggressive armor, it absolutely does not absolve her of the harm caused when her media machine targets vulnerable people like Erika Kirk.
Right.
Explanation is not an excuse. Surviving your own suffering does not grant you a permanent moral exemption to inflict public harm on others.
Okay, but wait, I'm struggling with this conclusion.
Yeah.
Because if I put myself in the shoes of someone who consumes this kind of media, I can hear the objection forming.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we know for a fact that institutions actually lie to the public, and let's be honest, history proves time and time again that governments, corporations, and official bodies do lie and cover things up. Isn't a hyper-aggressive, theatrical, deeply suspicious media exactly the watchdog we need? Why is Carter framing this ruthless suspicion as such a bad thing? Don't we need a guard dog that bites?
It's a very fair point, and it's the exact tension driving these political movements today. But Carter addresses this brilliantly using a medical analogy. He says, yes, suspicion is an immune response, but an immune response that attacks healthy tissue isn't a cure. It's an autoimmune disease.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful way to frame it.
It is, right. If a political movement loses its inner authority, meaning its ability to look at its own side and say no to a useful lie, or its willingness to protect an innocent person from a hungry crowd, it might win the daily news cycle.
Yeah.
It might get the most clicks and raise the most money, but it loses its soul. Carter calls this the right's civil war over truth.
Civil war over truth.
Yeah, it's an incredibly bitter internal battle right now. On one side, you have people who want to maintain evidentiary discipline. On the other side, you have people who believe the establishment is so deeply corrupt that relentless, ruthless, theatrical suspicion is the only winning strategy left.
But Carter's arguing that strategy is ultimately a suicide mission for a society.
Exactly. Because a society built on a foundation of permanent theatrical suspicion cannot sustain trust. And without trust, you can't have institutions, you can't have shared reality, and ultimately cooperation, which is the basis of civilization itself, just collapses.
Wow.
You end up in a world where everyone is a suspect and nothing is true.
It is a heavy, heavy thought, and it brings us right back to you, the listener, and the immense, almost frightening power you hold as an audience member. Every single time you demand instant answers to complex, unfolding tragedies, or every time you reward a commentator who offers you a dark, simple villain over messy, boring, incomplete facts, you are pulling out your wallet and funding the suspicion economy. You are the one training the algorithm. You are the one training the hosts to give you more theater.
The demand entirely creates the supply. If the audience stops clicking on the theater closes.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think back to that jigsaw puzzle on the table.
Yeah.
If our daily media diet has meticulously trained us to believe that the truth is only valuable when it comes with a dramatic twist, a massive cover-up, and a clear evil villain, are we slowly losing our psychological capacity to accept that sometimes the missing puzzle pieces weren't hidden by a grand conspiracy?
In the heart
they just
of this
fell off the table.
nation,
Are we losing our
under
ability to
skies
accept
so
that
blue,
sometimes a tragedy
there's a
is just
spirit that's stirring, values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground for freedom, for tradition in this land we found. We cherish our Constitution, the words that set us free, the right to bear arms, to speak and to agree. We honor our forefathers who fought with steadfast might for the dream of a nation shining bright in the night. In every town and village, in every heart and home, we'll uphold our principles, together we'll roam. Through trials and through triumphs, we'll never lose our way. With conservative values leading us day by day, we're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground for freedom, for tradition in this land we found. So here's to the brave, to the strong, to the free, to the spirit that binds us from sea to shining sea. We'll dive deep into our values, hold them close and true. For conservative hearts, there's no limit to what we can do. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground for freedom, for tradition in this land we